I asked Jill earlier this week what she wanted for Valentine's Day, and she said nothing. I'll find out whether she really meant that later today. I will, for you guys, by the way, I will share this little tidbit with you. Vacuum cleaners, no matter what the occasion, are not a good gift. Or mixers, yes. The most expensive vacuum cleaner I've ever seen was the one that caused severe bodily damage. Cheryl was nice enough to pass out. This was so sweet. The little Valentines. That was so nice. Mm-hmm. And it just took me back to elementary school, and passing out the Valentines. And how many of you remember doing that when you were in school? And, for a lot of us in this room, we go back to the days when things didn't have to be equal and fair, right? So some kids, the really popular kids in class, they got lots of Valentines, and then there were those who got a few, and then there were some who probably didn't all, on that popularity scale. It's always a little awkward, but, at least we weren't forced to have to give Valentines to people we didn't like. Well, Hallmark, has turned this into such a huge deal. Do you know, by the way, that the Valentine card is actually just 1 year older than St. Matthew's Church? That the first Valentine's card put out by Hallmark was done in 1913, and we've been scrambling for those gifts and cards and everything ever since. The Greeting Card Association of America estimates that 145 million Valentine's cards are going to be sent out this year. For many, of course, the day even becomes a day for getting engaged. They say that 6 million American couples will get engaged on Valentine's Day. So we alluded earlier to how this whole Valentine's thing got its start, with St. Valentine. Now, the legend is probably better than the real story. I'm going to share the legend with you thereby, all right? And the legend is that about 250 years after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, there was a priest by the name of Valentine who lived in Rome. Claudius was the emperor of Rome at the time, and some called him Claudius the Cruel. Now, Valentine didn't like the emperor very much, and, well, that was a feeling carried by a lot of people at the time. Claudius wanted a big army, and he thought that men should volunteer to join. The problem was that a lot of men didn't want to leave home to go off and fight in wars. They didn't want to leave their girlfriend or their wives behind. So Claudius, being the genius that he was, came up with the idea that if they banned marriage, that they would increase the size of the army. So he decreed that marriage would not be allowed. Of course, there were a lot of people who thought this was a foolish law, including Valentine. Valentine actually loved doing wedding ceremonies, so he kept doing it in secret, whispering the vows and listening for the footsteps of soldiers on the steps outside the church. Well, during one of those ceremonies, those soldiers showed up. And they arrested St. Valentine, and he was sentenced to death. But a lot of young people came and visited the jail there. They threw flowers and notes up to his window, wanting him to know that they still believed in love. One of those young people that visited Valentine was the daughter of the prison guard. Her father allowed her to visit him in his cell, and they often sat and talked for hours. She believed he did the right thing by ignoring the emperor and performing marriage ceremonies. On the day that Valentine was to be executed, he left her a note thanking her for her friendship and loyalty, and he signed it, "Love from your Valentine." That note started the custom of exchanging notes on Valentine's Day. It was written on the day he died, February 14th, 269. Now that is actually a pretty good story of how we got around to this holiday. And we tend to focus our attention on Valentine's Day on the romantic love. But it's not just romance for this holiday. That commandment in John 13 says, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another. By this all people will know you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." In the teachings of Jesus, that word love comes up a whole lot. As a matter of fact, in the book of John, in chapters 13 through 17, just in those 4 chapters alone, the word love is mentioned over 28 times. It's an important love. But we easily wind up misinterpreting that command to love. And part of that is because, in the English language, we have one word for love. Love. See, in the ancient Greek, they had multiple words for love, depending on what kind of love it was. The love we think of for Valentine's Day in that era, romantic love, was eros. And then the other kind of love that they would reference was unconditional love, which was agape. That's what God's love for us is agape love. Unconditional. Parents understand that, right? That we love our kids no matter what our kids do. We may punish our kids for things that they do, but that doesn't change the fact that we love them. That's God's love. And it comes without any kind of strings to it whatsoever. Now, in this room, in addition to those who know about that love that a natural parent has for their child, I see the faces of people who also have learned the meaning of that kind of unconditional love in raising a child that's not theirs biologically. That agape love by choice. When Jill and I got married, Emma was about 5 years old at the time. I never once used the word step in reference to her. She was just my daughter. The only time in all of her life that I actually used a reference to her being my stepdaughter was on her wedding day, because I wanted to honor her natural father. And before I would do that, though, I sent her a note saying, "You have always been my little girl, and that doesn't change today." And I let her know that in honor of and respect for your dad, I will today and today only make reference to being your stepfather. And then we go back to business as usual from there. And then that day of the wedding, I wound up spending time with her dad, both of us in tears, crying tears of joy for the little girl that both of us had a role in raising up, who wasn't a little girl any longer. And I was able to do her ceremony and take joy in seeing her father walk her down the aisle. But others in this room have done similar. There's a very special love that comes about with the parent that decides that they adopt a child. And we've got several in this congregation that have done that. And that makes me proud of this group of people. Because you're able to show the unconditional love of God to a child that isn't yours biologically. That's amazing stuff. You see, godly love isn't focused on us, it's focused on others. Godly love is something that's totally selfless. Philippians 2, verse 3 says, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourself." Now, several years ago, I read a story about a military pilot who actually, he referred to that as me third. God first, other people, and then me. And he shared that with everyone he could, that was the natural order to things, was me third. God first, second was other people, third was me. And he lived that out until the last day of his life, when he was flying his plane and the jet developed some sort of problem and started going down. Now, he had the option to hit the ejector button and pop out of that plane. But what he realized as the plane was coming down was that it was going straight toward a neighborhood, and that dozens of innocent lives would be wiped out if that plane crashed into that residential neighborhood. And so he fought the joystick on the plane all the way down and crashed the plane in a field instead of in that residential neighborhood, losing his own life, sacrificing his life so that others could live. And so I went back this week trying to find that original story. I wanted to remember the pilot's name and everything, and I couldn't find his story. But you know what I did find? I found that in September of last year, a Marine pilot flying in England did the exact same thing. That when his plane was going down, the witnesses said they could see that the pilot was steering it away from a populated area, and that he stayed with the plane all the way down. And then I scrolled down a little bit further, and I saw another incident, and another, and another, of these incredible people who were willing to sacrifice their lives so that others could live. Isn't that the ultimate love? That's living out that philosophy of God first, then others, then myself. Until the moment comes, none of us really know whether we would push that button and eject ourselves to safety, or if we would sacrifice ourselves for the sake of others. I want to think that I have enough courage and enough character and enough faith and enough belief to not hit that button, to not think in terms of saving myself. I want to believe that, but I'll never know unless faced with that kind of moment. But also think of that principal in Indianapolis who was from Evansville, who pushed kids out of the way of a school bus and lost her own life in the process. You know, what I heard was that people had been encouraging her to retire for quite some time. And she kept saying, why would I give up doing what I love doing more than anything else? And when you hear that, don't you just have to acknowledge God's hand in all of that? His hand in keeping her in a place where she was going to save some parents the grief that she would be willing to give up her own life so that those young children could go on and live a full life. See, Jesus asks us to do those sorts of things, and some people just have trouble understanding that kind of love because they don't understand that it's already been modeled for us, that it's already been done, that Jesus did exactly that on the cross, forsaking his own life for ours. And then Jesus asks us to do some other crazy things in the name of love. He said, "But I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you." How counterintuitive is that? But he's saying, hey, it's easy to love the people that you like. But try loving the person that you don't get along with. Try loving the neighbor who's a little too noisy. Try loving the person that you've had an ongoing feud with for a number of years. Try loving the person who's inflicted hurt or harm on someone that you love. But that kind of love is a witness to the whole world. John 13:35, "By this all people will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." So we're called to put ourselves third. We're called to love those, even those who might be our enemies. And God also calls us to love the unlovable. When I visit prison, I deal with men there who you might refer to as unlovable. Some guys who have done some pretty horrible things. Back in 1921, a guy by the name of Lewis Laws took over as warden of Sing Sing prison. Now this was like the toughest prison in the country. The worst of the worst got sent to Sing Sing. And here Lewis Laws was with a wife and 3 young daughters, and everybody warned his wife, don't ever set foot inside those walls in Sing Sing. But she wouldn't listen to him. First prison basketball game that came up inside the prison, she went, taking her 3 girls along with her. Took a seat on the bleachers right there beside the inmates. When Catherine heard that one of the convicted murderers in the prison was blind, she taught him Braille so that he could read. She learned of inmates who were hearing impaired, so she studied sign language so that they could communicate. For 16 years, Catherine Laws loved on those inmates, with her husband as the warden. For 16 years, she was softening the hearts of the men in that prison. Then came the day that the prisoners all realized that something was wrong because their warden, Lewis Laws, didn't report into work. Word spread through the prison pretty quickly that Catherine had died in a car accident. Following day, the acting warden took his early morning walk, and he noticed that there was a large gathering of inmates at the main gate to the prison. All of the prisoners there pressed against the fence, tears streaming down their faces. None of them spoke or moved. The warden made a remarkable decision. he opened the gates. At that time, the wardens lived on property on the prison grounds. So they opened the gates, and America's most hardened criminals walked out of that gate with no escorts, no guards, no shackles. And they walked to the home of the warden so they could pay their last respects to Catherine Law. And then each one of those inmates returned back through those open gates of the prison on their own. It was love that did that. 16 years of unconditional agape love. That's what made that possible. For men to be moved to that point where they're going to voluntarily return back to the place of their incarceration because they love and respected Catherine so much. First John 3:16. We talked about John 3:16 earlier. 1 John 3:16 says, we know what real love is because Jesus gave up his life for us. That's how we know the real deal. When you study the Bible, you can see Jesus portrayed as the Son of God, Emmanuel, morning star, the Lamb, the bridegroom, shepherd, the true vine. But you know, the real bottom line for referencing Jesus is love. Jesus is love. And he taught us the most valuable lessons that we can possibly learn in life. He said, love God, love others, and then love ourselves. So the charge in leaving here today is to be able to share that love. Not the eros kind of love, but the agape love. That even in married couples, as the relationship matures, the agape, that unconditional love, takes over. And for us to be able to show that to others, even in the most difficult of circumstances, even when our heart is breaking, even when we're facing the possibility of laying down our lives in order for someone else to live. That's how we follow the example set